So let's talk about some perspectives on why you have nightmares from a psychological stance. One theory is the threat simulation theory. Evolutionary psychologists propose that dreaming, including nightmares, is your brain's way of running through threat simulations. It's kind of like a flight simulator. It helps pilots prepare for flying. They get in and they're practicing the skills of flying. Well, nightmares are like that. Your brain is running threats, it's running scenarios through to have better responses to those threats, to rehearse through, okay, if I was to be chased by a scary figure, how would I respond to that? What would I do? Where would I run? Where would I hide? So this means that nightmares aren't failures, they're actually rehearsals, and your system is trying to help and prepare you. Again, we can understand why this would have been easy or important for our ancestors, because they needed to prepare to be chased potentially by a bear if you're living out in the wilderness. And so you have a nightmare of running from the bear. Your body and your mind is actually rehearsing how to best survive that scenario. So the problem isn't the simulation, it's when the simulation gets stuck on repeat without resolution. And this can come in the form of recurring nightmares that you're having every night. And a nightmare that helps you recognize the real threat is actually adaptive. It's helping you recognize that something in your environment is threatening to you. It can be a person, it can be a situation, it can even be an environmental factor, which I'm going to get into about your actual sleep environment and how that can influence you having more nightmares. And so as you understand that your nightmare is sending you a signal that there is something that is threatening in your environment, then you're able to hopefully listen to that signal and take action. So for example, if a person that you're thinking is your friend, but then you're having nightmares at night, maybe directly about, or you're even having more symbolic nightmares after being around them, after hanging out with them, that is, again, your mind, your unconscious mind letting you know, hey, there's a threat here that we need to look at. So you can see how that actually is not punishment. It is not a bad thing. It is a gift if we learn to listen to it, because then we can take action in our waking reality to amend the situation, to maybe potentially get away from somebody that is threatening us, or to address a situation or scenario and resolve it in waking reality. So a recurring nightmare that just causes fear without leading to understanding or change is the problem we're solving. So beyond the neuroscience, there are several psychological models for understanding nightmares, and each offers a valuable insight. There's the Jungian view that nightmares are messages from the unconscious. Carl Jung was a very famous dream analysis, and he popularized many terms that are in our language around nightmares, around the dream time, the collective unconscious, and he sees all dreams as messages from the unconscious, including nightmares. And he also, like I said, distinguishes between the personal unconscious, which is your own repressed material, and the collective unconscious, which are these archetypal patterns shared across humanity. So from a Jungian perspective, nightmares are attempts to integrate the material that you have been avoiding. They are invitations to meet parts of yourself that you have disowned. They're communications in symbolic language and opportunities for psychological wholeness. In this, we see that the nightmare isn't the enemy again. It's a part of you that wants integration. The fear that feels repressed is speaking up in your dream time and is letting you know, hey, it's time to integrate this. It's time to look at this. It's time to stop avoiding whatever this is. So an example of this is a woman who has recurring nightmares about a man attacking her with rage. Now, through a Jungian perspective and through Jungian work, she discovers that this is her own disowned anger. She's been conditioned to believe that her anger is dangerous or unfeminine, and so her psyche is insisting she integrate her own healthy aggression around boundary setting and her capacity. And when she begins to own her anger and express it appropriately in waking life, the nightmare shifts. you see how it's not always about an external threat. It can also be about our shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves that are seeking integration. And in the nightmare, these shadowy figures can again be aspects of ourselves that are turning to face us and show us something that we're not wanting to look at about what we're disowning in ourselves. So they're projections externally. The threatening, angry man can sometimes be one's own rage, one's own disempowered voice speaking back to them. Here's another really interesting psychological way to look at nightmares. It's the psychodynamic view of conflict and repression. So this theory suggests that nightmares emerge when there is an internal conflict of unconscious desires and internalized values. So these two things are butting up against each other, and this creates a tension that demands resolution. So from this view, nightmares are dramatizations of your internal conflicts. The dream content is representing different parts of yourself in conflict. The emotional intensity reflects how much you have been repressing or suppressing your desires, and the integration of all of this requires acknowledging both sides of conflict. Our conscious mind is often in conflict. We may want something, but we also feel like morally or with our idealized versions of ourselves, it doesn't align with what we actually want. A lot of times our words and actions won't line up. A lot of times we may feel two ways at once. This is a very natural and human experience to be in conflict inside of ourselves, in our inner worlds. And so within that conflict, if we are not acknowledging it, then it gets repressed or suppressed into the unconscious and into the dream time. One example of this is a man that has recurring nightmares about being trapped in his office while a fire spreads. Psychodynamically, this might represent his conflict between duty of staying in his office, being in the job, and his authentic desire of wanting to escape, perhaps pursue creative work or another line of work. So the dream is insisting that this conflict be acknowledged and resolved. You see how within the symbolic realms, he has the office of his duty, of his workplace, and the fire of some force that is coming in to destroy or challenge that duty, and the conflict is seeking resolution. There's also the cognitive behavioral view of learned threat response and that reason of why we have nightmares. So the CBT perspective focuses on how our brains learn threat patterns. An event triggers a threat activation in your nervous system, and your brain encodes this as this scenario equals a threat. And then similar scenarios automatically activate that response. If the association isn't updated, it persists. So nightmares from this view are conditioned threat responses that have become oversensitive. They are learned patterns that can be unlearned through new experiences. The fixated threat simulations need updating, and there are opportunities to teach your brain new associations. So let me give you an example for this particular outlook on why we have nightmares. If somebody experiences a car accident, for example, after that they have nightmares about driving, about losing control, about being trapped. And from a CBT view, their brain has learned that driving equals a threat. So treatment would involve gradually reintroducing safe driving experiences so the brain can say, okay, actually every time I drive, this isn't a threat. And a nightmare rewrite with this would work similarly. You would imagine in your mind the nightmare that you're having about your car being out of control, about running off the road, and rewrite that so you're able to update that association in your dream time. Now, a lot of times the car can also symbolize a lot of other things in your dreams, so it might not be directly tied to a waking life car accident. But if you have a a situation or a trauma that you know is present, like a car accident, and you're having a lot of car accident dreams, that's a really clear connection there between the waking reality experience and the nightmare that is trying to process that threat, that is trying to process that trauma and work through it. So there's also the somatic side of things, like I talked about earlier. When animals encounter danger, after they are able to escape it, they shake it off. But we store a lot of trauma in our bodies. We're taught to keep still and to hold it in and to not move when we're afraid, to just look like we're okay, like everything's okay, especially if it's threats that aren't life-threatening, but are just situational to interpersonal experiences. Then we're taught, okay, I'm just going to smile and pretend it's all okay, even though inside I'm feeling horrible, I'm feeling threatened, I'm feeling scared, etc. And so then that becomes frozen in your body, and nightmares are your nervous system's attempt to complete the process of actually being able to shake out or run from whatever you're feeling threatened by, or fight back. All of these repressed emotions and these repressed responses that we're having then are getting stuck in our body. And so your nervous system is replaying those scenarios in the nightmare. And again, it might not be a direct replay of the situation, but a more symbolic replay in order to try and finish that interrupted pattern. So healing this also requires the body to complete the survival response. And that's why a lot of somatic work of shaking, sounding, and movement can be really effective in nightmare resolution too. So it's not just about working with it mentally, but we also, especially if the somatic reasoning is the root of our nightmares, we need to work with our bodies to move some of the energies so that we can resolve those nightmare patterns. So an example of this is if a woman was, say, attacked and froze and she couldn't fight or flee, then years later she might have nightmares where she's paralyzed and can't escape. Somatically, her nervous system is still stuck in that freeze response, and so she would need to, again, use the opportunity of learning from her nightmare in order to move her energy and to move out of that frozen activation, and somatically work with her body to complete the pattern that the threat induced of freezing always. And so the nightmare is offering her an opportunity to see, okay, your body is stuck in a freeze response, and then in waking reality, somatically, she can move, she can emote loudly in a more fight energy, or she can shake out the trauma in order to try and ease some of that, along with obviously the psychological side of things and being able to work through it both with a therapist along with the dream work that we're doing here. So finally, let's bring this all together. There is another view of nightmares that is the existential view, which is more about the human experience. We are here in a physical body that is not immortal, it is finite, and nightmares often reflect the human condition. So a lot of times nightmares confront us with death and mortality, which is our fundamental helplessness, in a sense, our fundamental final destination of that at some point our physical bodies will not be here. And so nightmares can be working that angle of things and can be our existential dread around what comes next or around losing this physical body. A lot of times they can also tap into this feeling of isolation and radical aloneness, of feeling like we don't have allies, especially if in our waking reality we are feeling isolated and alone. Then that can be amplified in the dream time through nightmares. And then they also face us with our responsibility and the weight of our choices. A lot of times nightmares will involve situations where we are dealing with something that is very heavy and weighted, and maybe it relates to a choice we made in waking reality, and we're trying to work through, especially if we regret that choice, we're trying to work through that in the dream realm, in the nightmares. So Within that existential view, we're able to pull back and see, yes, nightmares are a part of the dream time because they're a part of our mind processing our human condition. And that's something we'll probably do for as long as we're alive. And yet the more we feel at peace in our waking reality, the less nightmares we'll have in our dream time. So to re-articulate this, the nightmare is not a burden, it's not a curse, you're not being punished. It's a gift showing you that there are areas in your psyche that are seeking resolution. There are threats, there are experiences, there are past traumas that want to be healed, and they're calling out to you. And a lot of times we don't listen to our dream time, so then they have to start yelling out to you, hey, this needs attention, this needs to be addressed, we can heal this, let's do it together. So now that we've looked at everything from a neurological standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, from a somatic standpoint, and an existential standpoint, we know that we can help to work through our nightmares, and we're going to move into, in the next section, talking about what we can begin to do to move through our nightmares, to begin to heal them. But having this background, I find, really helps, because the more you understand the why of why nightmares are happening, you can shift your attitude toward them, and then you can really work with them on a deep level rather than just trying to repress, suppress, or flee the nightmares.